Hello, I'm BrigantiaBlackbird of BlackbirdsBrew. Happy Friday and welcome to Storyteller's Corner. This month we're talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and today it's about Aangs, triumphs, and tribulations. In the series, the character Aang is in a unique situation. The fate of all of the world lies on his shoulders, and he's 12. He has to master all four elements. And first in the series, the only thing he really already knows is the element of air. And then, of course, there's a time crunch for the storyline. He has to squeeze in a process that usually takes years into mere months. And on top of that, he is 100 years outside of his own time. Early on in the story, we learned that Aang was informed that he was the Avatar a full 4 years before he should have been. Usually they let them know when they're about 16. Aang was 12. This affected his sense of self and purpose, his relationship with his peers, and his training, and it was devastating for him. He was instantly treated differently, even by his friends, and he had all manners of expectations thrust upon him, particularly by the adults in his life. Then the monks in charge of the temple where he lived threatened to remove him from the care of his guardian because they wanted him to train more and more and more and essentially weaponize him because they knew that a war with the Fire Nation was on the horizon. So Aang ended up running away. Well, he flew away on Appa, his flying bison, and then they got caught in a storm, over this huge body of water, and they were sunk into the waves, and his life is in danger. So his avatar state activated, and that froze him and Appa. And then 100 years passed, and then they were discovered by Katara and Sokka, quite by chance. After emerging from the ice, Aang finds a world that is completely out of balance and unrecognizable to him. The air nomads were wiped out shortly after his disappearance, and he was the sole representation of his culture and the world as it had been. I mean, just imagine that. But Aang somehow remained he was able to retain his cheerfulness and his innocence and his sense of humor and his sense of fun that really endeared him to a lot of the people he meets in the story because it provided them with a sense of hope that perhaps the March of the Fire Nation would not go on forever and there were better things in the future. But in order for that to happen, of course, the war would need to be won and order restored. Several of the characters Aang encountered over the course of the series did see him mostly just as a means to an end, only as the Avatar, and one that needed to come up to snuff and be quick about it. Over and over again, Aang found his natural instincts as an airbender challenged. The philosophy that he was taught and his interpretation of that philosophy through the eyes of a child proved to not always be equal to the situation, or to be practical, or to take anyone else's views into consideration. Now, part of the Avatar's traditional training is that after mastering their native element and being duly informed of their identity, they would then leave their homeland, travel the world, find masters and teachers of the other elements, and they would in turn live amongst those people. They'd be wearing the same clothes, eating the same food, absorbing the culture, and learning to understand each nation's philosophy. Now, while Aang did successfully master the four elements by the end of the series, at least on a rudimentary level, what he did not master was the art of what the character Uncle Iroh described as taking wisdom from many sources. And certainly this is understandable in the context of the story. Aang was extremely young. He was thrust into a war. He had to scramble to master the martial aspect of the elements in a matter of months, and he had no time to properly familiarize himself with other cultures, their philosophies, and mode of life. But this shortfall did affect Aang's decisions and his ability to listen to advice that wasn't agreeing with what he already thought. And the final episodes of the show have been criticized for giving Aang an easy out that didn't force him to examine his convictions as far as the air nomad philosophy goes, or in the context of his duty of the Avatar, or the practical necessity of the final battle. And if Aang hadn't been the last living member of the air nomads, perhaps he would have developed a bit differently. But because he was the last, and because he felt the pressure to preserve and continue his culture, this created additional resistance towards seriously contemplating other ideas or seeing uh, any grounds to have an appreciation for him. Now, there was a vision of his past self, one of him, because he did have many multiple lives to consult with. They did counsel him that while the goal of air nomad spirituality was to detach themselves from the world because they believed that would achieve enlightenment, but that the avatar could never do that because the avatar's sole duty is to the world. And this reality was a constant source of conflict for Aang. He remained an airbender first and foremost, despite his duty to embody the balance of the four nations. And not only did Aang truly, in his heart of hearts, just want to be an airbender, he also just wanted to be a kid, which was understandable, but he was thrust into circumstances that required him to mature. And instead of pursuing that and accepting that as part of his destiny, he clung to his childhood as much as he possibly could, and he wanted the impossible. And despite that, more often than not, he tended to get his own way, and in so doing, his evolution as a character was stunted. Now, on the one hand, Aang was successfully able to accomplish his mission to bring about an end to the 100-year war, but on the other hand, can it truly be said that he brought balance back to the world if he didn't even achieve balance within himself? Balance for the avatar requires far more than mastering the martial application of the elements. It's also about seeing the value in the philosophy of each nation and seeing them as components of the greater whole. This Aang unfortunately did not achieve, which is why the method through which he defeated the Fire Lord doesn't always sit well with the fans, and why Aang getting the girl at the end doesn't quite ring true. So in some ways, I do think that this character was underserved. Aang was presented to us, the audience, as the answer the world needs, without really establishing why he was the answer or why his ideas for facing things were so much better than anyone else's. It was just supposed to be taken for granted that was the case. And as a result, his character arc was more of a plateau. But on the other hand, Aang also represents the idea of overcoming great difficulties against long odds. That's a very hopeful message, which is much needed these days. So that's my take on why I think Aang's character is kind of a mixed bag, and why I think there has been perhaps some undue idealization of him and a little bit of willful ignorance regarding his flaws as a character, and not really thinking through the implications of those. But I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you are super familiar with this series. Tell me about it in the comments section, or come see us on Gilded. There's a link to join us in the description box below, and we'd be happy to have you. But that's all for this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.